Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field. Buried treasure. I remember back when I was a kid, they had this TV show on Channel 9 out of Windsor, if you're old enough to remember that. Bill Kennedy at the movies, and he'd play all kinds. Well, they weren't all those. They were old movies back then. They're super old movies now, but one of the type of movies he liked to show were pirate movies. Captain Blood, starring Errol Flynn, The Princess and the Pirates, starring Gene Kelly, and all those pirate movies. And they all involved one thing: buried treasure, and where to find and get the buried treasure. For those of you who are much younger, you might remember the movie from the 80s called The Goonies. It's a classic that they'd go and try to find the treasure hidden by the pirates. Well, often when we think of buried treasure, we think of it as just something for a fairy tale or something for a story. But it's actually a reality. It is. In Asia and in Europe and parts of Africa, people once in a while find buried treasure. In fact, recently in England, some farmer unearthed a chest of coins dating back to the 6th century. And why is this a reality? Because of how people lived thousands of years ago. Imagine a world, no TV, no radio, no satellites, no newspapers, no communication. You know what communication was? Someone rides in on a horse and tells you what's happening. Imagine you're living in the village of Fraser, and the only way you know it's coming in from the outside world is the next person coming in horseback and sits down using the town square or maybe the tavern, and you ask, what's new in the world? And they'll tell you what they found, what they heard from the village of Warren or the village of Sterling Heights to tell you what's going on. That's how you knew. That was the only way you knew. So imagine that world. Well, imagine there's an invasion or a riot or rebellion or something going on. You'd find out about it the same way. And unfortunately, you'd probably find out about it within a horse ride of when it was happening. So you didn't have much time to get away. You had to move fast. You had to load up the cart, load up the kids, and get out of town and get away from what was coming. Therefore, if you were a person of means and you had gold and silver coins, because they didn't have paper money and they didn't have credit cards, and gold is heavy, you would have it buried. You would have a place in your cellar or a place in the barn where you'd have a place where you'd bury your money and you'd keep it hidden. There weren't any banks that you trust anyway. That didn't exist either. You'd literally bury your money in your ground, and then you'd take off, figuring that when the riot was over or the war was over or whatever it was, you'd come back and you'd get your money back. Well, sometimes the person didn't come back. They didn't make it out of town fast enough, or for whatever reason they could never return. And the barn falls down, and the house falls down, trees grow up, place goes back to seed, that treasure's still sitting there. And somebody centuries later comes along, clears out the land, puts in another house, digging a well, and boom, what does he find? The treasure from hundreds or even thousands years ago. Buried treasure is not something that is just for the fiction books and movies. And there's something even more real than that. And that's the treasure that's buried inside of every one of our lives. That was placed deep inside of our lives by virtue of our baptism. And that treasure is the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ, very real. And he's buried inside of every single one of us. Now, when I often talk about parables, it's important to remember that Jesus connected these parables. They weren't just out there by themselves. And when I think of buried treasure, I think of another parable that Jesus taught. Remember the one about the 3 servants? And the owner gives money to each one of those servants and says, go and do something with this while I'm gone. And the first one works real hard and he multiplies it by 10. The second one multiplies it by 2. And remember what the third one does? He goes and he buries it. When the owner comes back, he's very happy that the first 2 took a chance and were energetic and tried their best. But he's very disappointed in the third one because he wouldn't take any chance at all. Risk aversive, I guess. Bury the treasure? Here it is. You see, the owner, the master of that story, his joy isn't because he made tenfold out of one. His joy is that he had servants who were willing to work, willing to try, and willing to put some energy out there. Same with the second servant. His anger to the third servant is that servant wouldn't even take a chance. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field. That treasure is the Lord Jesus Christ inside of every single one of us. The only question we have to ask ourselves is that, are we willing to take a chance to unearth that treasure and see where it takes us in life?